New Jersey swung 10 points from Biden winning it by about 16 to Kamala Harris winning it by about 6.
So it's the hope that people are fed up with Murphy. They almost threw him out in 2021. They're fed up a bit with kind of all Democratic rule in Trenton.
Are they going to be willing to vote for Chitterelli with Trump in office? And that seems to be a huge question.
Part of me wonders, though, if we end up looking back at this gubernatorial campaign and saying the single most important event in the 2025 New Jersey governor's race was the election in 2024.
Welcome to the Decision Desk HQ Podcast. I'm your host, Geoffrey Skelley, the Chief Elections Analyst at DDHQ. Two states, New Jersey and Virginia, have gubernatorial elections in now less than 2 weeks. We covered Virginia in our last episode of the podcast. So this time around, we'll take a look at the Garden State, which might have the closer of the two governors' contests as things are shaping up. The New Jersey race features a matchup between Democratic Representative Mikey Sherrill and Republican Jack Chitterelli, who's a former state assemblyman and who also ran a very close race but lost in the 2021 gubernatorial election to Democratic Governor Phil Murphy in New Jersey. And Murphy is term limited and heading out of office, and so got an open seat race in New Jersey. So New Jersey is a blue-leaning state, and Sherrill does lead in the polls, but as we'll discuss, Chitterelli definitely has a path to victory. And to talk about the Garden State with me, I'm excited to welcome Steve Kornacki, who probably needs no introduction for devoted election watchers. Steve is NBC News' chief data analyst and a national political correspondent. If you've watched election night coverage, you have probably seen Steve at the big board pointing out numbers and trends on maps as the votes come in. He's also the author of The Red and the Blue, 1990s and the Birth of Political Tribalism, which I think I actually have a copy right there. It's quite good. It's an excellent overview of how politics of that period kind of played out and how they laid the foundation for a lot of the divisiveness we see today. But some viewers and listeners may not know that Steve got his start in political journalism covering New Jersey. He wrote for a site called politicsnj.com in the early 2000s and hosted a political news segment on News 12 New Jersey. So I thought he'd be the perfect person to come on and talk about what's going on in this highly competitive gubernatorial race. So, Steve, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Geoffrey, I'm happy to, and no, I never get tired of talking Jersey, so this would be great.
Perfect. Well, see, I knew you'd be perfect. So to start out, I thought we would sort of set the scene for viewers and listeners by talking a little bit about where the New Jersey race stands here with, less than 2 weeks to go, and then dig into some of the sort of recent electoral trends and how they could influence how this race between Sherrill and Chitterelli plays out. And so I guess just to start out, I thought I'd ask you sort of what your current take on the race is at this juncture.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you set it up. There's a path, and we'll talk about it. There's a path that could be there for Chitterelli, and I think both parties have been very aware of that. I guess the one thing I would say is just this is the less data-driven, more sort of what I hear from people on both sides in New Jersey take on it. And I would just say that I've noticed in the last, I'd say, week to 10 days, a bit of a shift there, where I think Democrats have grown more confident, and I think Republicans have grown less confident. I think each side was very aware, given the shift in the state in 24 toward Trump, given the near miss in 21 for Chitterelli, and given Murphy's low approval rating, was aware of this potential that's existed there on paper for Chitterelli. And I think the public polling and it would seem the polling from each party that they're responding to is now sort of telling them that maybe Chitterelli's not realizing that potential. But again, that's poll driven, I think, from them, and polls were wrong in Jersey in 21. So we'll see.
Yeah, I just brought up for those viewing, I brought up the New Jersey polling average from Decision Desk HQ, and in our average, Mikey Sherrill leads by just a hair over 4 percentage points over Chitterelli. But you do, as you sometimes see in polling, you see, in fact, actually, it's a little reassuring when you see it, because if all the pollsters are showing the same thing, they're hurting, it might make you a little suspicious. But I would say that pollsters aren't really hurting in New Jersey because it seems like we've sort of seen a range of polls that have shown it from anything as close as tied from maybe a Republican pollster to Cheryl even having close to a double-digit lead in some of the recent surveys. So kind of, that I think sort of illustrates the range of where this race might end up. Uh, and perhaps that's kind of a helpful thing for thinking about it. And I wanted to point out that you mentioned New Jersey's swing to the right, and I thought maybe that would be a good place to start talking about what could go into, well, like what the things we want to watch on election night are, what the trends are in New Jersey, and why it was really notable. It swung a huge amount to the right in 2024 in the presidential race, and actually the second most by margin, second only to New York. New Jersey swung 10 points from Biden winning it by about 16 to Kamala Harris winning it by about 6 in 2024, and only New York swinging 10.5 points from those in between those two elections swung to the right more. And I guess I know you've written a lot about this, and I was kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on sort of what contributed to this and how you think it could play into this matchup.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's striking about those Trump gains, it's not just in New Jersey on there, but to look at New Jersey, it's how concentrated those gains were among non-white voters, and in traditionally Democratic areas of the state. Trump and Ciattarelli both exceeded expectations. Ciattarelli in 2021 in his gubernatorial campaign, Trump in 2024, but they exceeded those expectations with completely different voters, almost completely different voters. And in 2024, you just see it with Trump. It's non-white voters sort of across the board, especially Hispanic voters. His gains were the most pronounced in heavily Hispanic areas. Asian Americans were sort of his second most significant, substantial gains. And he did make gains with black voters in heavily black areas, but not as dramatic. But basically anywhere where that non-white population starts to go up in New Jersey, you saw, you see red there, trending away from Democrats toward Trump.
Yeah, I brought up a map here of northern New Jersey. I zoomed in, and basically showing the shifts in every municipality in New Jersey from 2020 to 2024, and it's so striking to see a part of the state that is, very much reliably blue, have such dramatic swings. Now, a lot of these places still voted Democratic overall, but it was a question of, Patterson is maybe the most incredible case, a place that's about 65% Hispanic. Patterson Biden won it by about 61, but Harris only won it by about 28. So it still went Democratic, but that is a huge shift in margin for one election. And so, other places like Elizabeth City, I mean, a lot of these, as you said, were heavily Hispanic. And I have a table that you put together for an article of yours that I thought was sort of helpful. I just didn't, I could see Elizabeth right there, 67% Hispanic. Patterson is there, 63% Hispanic, just these huge swings to the right for the GOP. And I guess, we saw that nationally. But I guess when you're thinking about places like New Jersey and New York and California, I mean, how does this in a way maybe change the political calculations for the GOP? And you can limit that to New Jersey since we're talking about Jersey.
Oh, I mean, what the opportunity there for Republicans now, this could be fool's gold. This may be something that only happens for Donald Trump and no other Republican. That's the big question here. But the mathematical impact of these kinds of gains, give you an example. By the way, we say most of those were still Democratic, like Passaic. You see there, that's Passaic City, not Passaic County. So people can see Trump actually won that. He won it outright. And those gains too, like they were most dramatic for him between 20 and 24. He'd already started to make some gains between 16 and 20 in these places too. So if you extended further and did an 8-year trend, I mean, these shifts are even more seismic. But to put it in some perspective, we said that Ciattarelli and Trump performed well with different types of voters in their two campaigns. If you took that 2021 loss for Jack Ciattarelli to Phil Murphy. Citarelli lost the state by just over 3 points. If you simply gave him Trump's vote share in each of these cities that you're looking at right here, if you did that, he basically wipes away his statewide margin of defeat. It comes down to 6,400 votes, I think, 0.2 of a point, something along those lines. So just by giving the Trump share in majority non-white parts of New Jersey, if Citarelli could realize those gains and then just do everything else he did in 2021, the race is basically a tie at that point. So it's that big of an impact. But again, the first Republican not named Donald Trump who does the next Republican not named Donald Trump who does this will be the first, you know.
Yes, and that is obviously the many, many millions of dollars question because, if New Jersey's competitive, oh boy, we're gonna get all kinds of, ad spending, in a presidential cycle. But I you were talking about sort of the differences between how Citarelli and Trump performed, and I have a map of this that I think is really telling where you see that this area of sort of North Jersey around the much more sort of dense, more blue collar, more ethnically and racially diverse areas of northern New Jersey. Like zoom in here for people who can see this, and places like Paterson, Newark, Jersey City. These are all places where Trump did markedly better than Jack Ciattarelli did in 2021. Whereas Ciattarelli maybe had a little bit more of the older Republican coalition. And maybe that makes sense. We could talk a little bit about Ciattarelli's background and like how why he still may hold some appeal to a certain type of voter who, in certain cases, has shifted away from the GOP, at least in presidential elections in recent times. Um, but Ciattarelli did much better out in the suburbs, the exurbs, more rural parts of New Jersey, Western New Jersey, or if you're sort of looking at the northern part. And if you zoom in on all these more the denser parts, the more urban parts, Trump clearly does a lot better than Ciattarelli did. And it's just interesting to see this now. Obviously, a presidential cycle and a gubernatorial cycle. You are talking about two somewhat different electorates. Obviously, the number of people who show up for a gubernatorial election is notably smaller than for a presidential. But nonetheless, to see just some really dramatic differences in the coalitions for the same, ostensibly the same party, right? Is a fascinating thing to see, especially when both races were relatively close. It's not like one was so dramatically different than the other. You're talking about 6-point loss for Trump, 3-point or so loss for Ciattarelli. And I know that you specifically highlighted to me Morris County, which is sort of up here west of Paterson, west of the Passaic and Newark areas, as an interesting test case for sort of thinking about how Ciattarelli did in 2021 and what he needs to do again in 2025, while also taking advantage of some of these changes that Trump was able to bring about.
Yeah, Morris is interesting and I think key for a couple reasons. I mean, it is where so to put it in some perspective, back in 2020, Biden carried Morris by 4 points over Trump. In 2021, this is one of those places that you're saying where Ciattarelli did so much better. Ciattarelli won it by double digits in 2021 over Phil Murphy by 11. And then last year, Trump did win it, but it came all the way back down to 3 points. And this is the key type of voter. And so here you go. You're looking at the municipalities here inside of Morris County. Now, there's sort of a range here of the types of towns that are here. There's some genuine sort of blue collar, middle class towns, and then there are some quintessentially sort of wealthy suburban enclaves, like a lot of people associate with New Jersey. Give you a couple to take a look at here. A good one is Mendham. I think it's row 21 right there. Okay, this is actually where Chris
Borough or
Christie
the township? The
is
borough.
from.
I think you meant the borough.
Yeah, but yeah, you could look at either one of them because you'll see the same trend here where take a look, the median household income there, 250, 223,000, get a high median income there. These are heavily white, uh, huge concentration of college educated white voters. We've talked about these being sort of Trump phobic voters nationally, that cohort that's moved far away from Trump. So here you go. Trump lost these, both the borough and the township. He lost them both in 20. Ciattarelli, almost, 15, 20-point improvement over Trump, net improvement in 2021, and snaps all the way back in 2024. Harris winning those basically by the same margin that Joe Biden did. And there are places like this all over North Jersey, Morris County, even in the Philadelphia suburbs. You find places like this all over New Jersey. These are the kinds of places where I think Chitterelli's got his biggest challenge on election day, because in 2021, Trump was no longer president. Nobody knew what was coming, that he was. I mean, some people, figured he was running again, but I think a lot of voters had kind of priced Trump out of the equation in 21. And I think it opened the door for Chitterelli in places like this to win back those suburban voters who, they're not nuts about the Democrats in Trenton. They're not nuts about high taxes, worry about property taxes, this kinds of thing. They do not like Donald Trump. And in what they may have thought at the time was a post-Trump environment, these voters were comfortable going with Chitterelli in 21. You can see that their opinion of Trump didn't change at all, as evidenced by 2024. And so this is the question. Trump's back in the White House. Can Chitterelli get those numbers again? Because he has to get those numbers and arguably maybe even improve on them a little bit if he wants to actually win this thing. So those are the kinds of places that I'm going to be looking at. And the added challenge, when I say Morris is so key, the added challenge here for Chitterelli is this is the area that Mikey Sherrill represents in Congress. So it's this traditionally Republican area that's moved away from Republicans because of Trump, that also during that period, Sherrill was able to win a congressional seat. Can Chitterelli win a Mendham, borough by 12 points, the township by 9? Can he do that again? I'm looking for that on election night.
Yeah, we've talked about sort of Trump having a somewhat different coalition than Chitterelli did in 2021, and I do think, to your point earlier, I wanted to actually make mention of this, that you could basically take the best Republican performance in 2021 or 2024, whichever was better, across every municipality in New Jersey, and make that your sort of your threshold, and make that, like, on election night, if you just had a sheet of those and you were watching the results come in, just calculate the difference. How well is Chitterelli performing up to those standards? Because if he's hitting them, he might narrowly win, as you were saying, talking about even just broadly with places that are more majority non-white, for instance. And I think that that's such a fascinating reality. And I was curious, knowing that you know a lot about New Jersey politics, I was kind of curious how you see Jack Chitterelli in, this is a former state assemblyman who predated Trump. His time in the assembly, overlapped, I guess. I think toward the end of his time in the assembly was right when Trump came on the scene. He initially was not pro-Trump. He has a whole background in politics. I think he was a county selectman or whatever, the supervisor. I'm not sure what the term is actually in New Jersey, in Somerset County, which is west, not northern, but kind of central Jersey, even though I know there's debate about whether something like central Jersey actually exists. And so I was kind of curious how you see Chitterelli, because he might be, strangely, I do think that one of the reasons he's even in this position is that he is able to somewhat straddle, yeah, sure, I'm MAGA, with I predate that, and I have the sort of more traditional Republican antecedents that people might look at and feel more comfortable with. And maybe that straddling ability is how he got really close in 2021, and maybe how he still could get close this time around.
Yeah, I mean, look, his only chance of winning is people seeing the two sides of him that you're kind of outlining there. Because look, you say Somerset County. Yeah, Somerset County is everything we were just talking about with Morris County, with these towns. I mean, Somerset County is wealthy. It's Bedminster is in Somerset County. Huge share of college educated white voters. It was the biggest single improvement as a county for Chitterelli over Trump, the last time around. And then again, it swung all the way back pretty much in 2024. So Somerset County is just a lot like Morris County here. And yet Chitterelli, look, he kind of came up in New Jersey politics in a pre-Trump era when the equation just for what it took to succeed as a Republican was very different. And I think he recognized, he had that near miss in 21. He started running for 2025 right away, and recognized, as Trump kind of reasserted control of the party and then obviously won, recognized that if he was not in Trump's good graces, he was going to lose a Republican primary in 2025, and he wouldn't get this chance again. So he really cultivated a Trump endorsement. And this just it sets up this test. Can the Jack Ciattarelli, who really campaigned and politicked for Trump's endorsement and really celebrated it and really advertised it in the Republican primary and isn't running away from it in the fall, um, can that can a voter in Somerset County, can a voter in Morris County who does not like Donald Trump look at that and say, "Yeah, I still see the pre-Trump Jack," or do they look at that and they say, "I don't want any part of that"?
Oh, that's yeah, thank you. That's like an excellent point. Just sort of, what do voters see? And I do think there's opportunity for Ciattarelli, and I want to talk about Cheryl in a second, but an opportunity for Ciattarelli in that I thought it was maybe worth mentioning Phil Murphy, the Democratic governor, and the fact that Democrats do control, all of government in Trenton. Maybe how that's playing in for Ciattarelli. I know he's run ads talking about utility rates. He's while Cheryl is trying to connect Ciattarelli to Trump as much as possible. You see Ciattarelli obviously trying to connect Cheryl to Murphy. Uh, Murphy's not terribly unpopular, but nonetheless, he's a second-term governor who's not that popular. And so I was kind of curious about that dynamic.
Yeah, look, New Jersey has not given the same party control of the governorship for 3 straight terms since, like, 1961. So there's a bit of a, the hope for the Ciattarelli campaign is that, Murphy's approval, which depending on the poll you're looking at, can be in the high 30s, can be in the low 40s. It's not better than Donald Trump's in the state. So it's the hope that people are fed up with Murphy. They almost threw him out in 2021. They're fed up a bit with kind of all Democratic rule in Trenton, and that they look at, I mean, there is somewhat of a history, in states like New Jersey. Again, you saw this a little bit more pre-Trump, but states like New Jersey, states like Connecticut, Massachusetts, you had those voters who were sort of culturally moderate suburbanites who liked having Republican governors to keep an eye on all those Democrats in the legislature and all the Democrats who kind of otherwise would have monopoly on the state capital. So, Ciattarelli is hoping that instinct is still there, and he is an acceptable vehicle to that type of voter. And again, I'm just struck though by the different. It's why this is so fascinating to me because, I feel a couple ways about this. One, I feel that if Kamala Harris had won last year, I think Ciattarelli would be a shoo-in right now. And if Murphy were eligible to run for a third term and were seeking a third term, I suspect the polling would be tighter than it is right now. I think the Democrats, in some ways, the term limit is helping the Democrats because offering up Cheryl, who's not, connected to Trenton, she's a member of Congress who wasn't on the political scene before she ran in 2018. They're offering up their own sort of, here's something new if you're sick of stale Trenton. At least they're hoping voters will see it that way. So I think those are a couple, part of me wonders, we'll see. Part of me wonders though, if we end up looking back at this gubernatorial campaign and saying the single most important event in the 2025 New Jersey governor's race was the election in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I said something, or my guest or I said something similar about Winston Earl Sears' situation in Virginia in the 2025 gubernatorial race there. That basically the moment Donald Trump became president, it became extremely difficult for a Republican to win the governorship in Virginia. New Jersey has some different things going on in terms of the kind of swing we saw in 2024 was much sharper than in Virginia, for instance, toward the GOP. But the fact of the matter is, Jack Ciattarelli would probably have an easier time running against in an environment where Kamala Harris was president of the United States. It would just fundamentally be easier. The Republican base would be more energized because it would be more upset with the status quo. Whereas right now, you talked about some of those suburban affluent communities where Ciattarelli did much better than Trump, and those voters voting Democratic in the presidential race, are they going to be willing to vote for Ciattarelli with Trump in office? And that seems to be a huge question. I don't want to give Cheryl short shrift here before we close out. So I was curious about sort of. It seems to me that Democrats have been sort of lukewarm about her as a candidate from sort of the get-go, or maybe she's sort of underwhelmed. She obviously has this very impressive biography, Naval Academy grad, Navy helicopter pilot, And well, what's interesting to me is that some things that have popped up in this campaign, including the fact that she apparently didn't walk at her Naval Academy graduation. I guess I was curious what you've heard, what you've taken from this about sort of Cheryl's candidacy and how this race is maybe closer than Democrats would have liked, even if they are feeling a little better than they did a week ago, for instance.
I had a Democrat tell me that Cheryl is losing the campaign, but is going to win the election anyway. I think there's a sense that, she won her seat in 2018 in a blue wave year in a district that had been Republican for a long time, but it was an open seat. The Republican incumbent didn't run for reelection, I think, sensing what was coming. So it wasn't that she had an easy race in 2018, but it wasn't, a lot of the hard work was kind of done just in terms of the environment being set for her in 18. And since then, she's been fine in terms of getting reelected. I think a lot of what we've seen in the last few months is she's being tested for the first time in a way I don't really think she even was in 2018. And it surprised some Democrats. She's had trouble. There's an ad that the Chitterelli folks ran that I thought was quite effective. Now, maybe the polling is suggesting it wasn't, but Cheryl was asked on an interview show on the CBS affiliate in New York what the first thing she would do as governor was. And it was just a sort of stumbling word salad non-answer. And all the ad was 30 seconds of just letting her speak, let the interview clip play. And so I think Democrats have felt, she's not as impressive as a candidate as I think they thought she was. The reason she got the nomination was the Democrats around the state were convinced, Democratic leaders around the state were convinced she was the most electable candidate, just based on the suburban background. We're talking about Morris County, winning in that kind of part of the state, having this compelling biography, helicopter pilot, Navy helicopter pilot, all of these things. And some of that's been undermined, I think, to a degree by this campaign. The other thing that's notable to me when you talk to Democratic elected officials in Jersey, even those who supported her, who have supported her, when you ask about how you think she'll do as governor, they don't know. She has no experience in Trenton. Trenton is a very sort of cutthroat, insular political world. She didn't come up through it. She doesn't have much experience with it. And I remember having a conversation with a Democratic elected official just before the primary who was backing her. And I said, how's she going to do in the primary? And he said, well, I think she's going to win, but I hope Gottheimer does. Because Josh Gottheimer, the congressman from Bergen County, who was also running, this elected official felt was better suited to Trenton and to the kind of deal making that the New Jersey sort of political class is accustomed to, and is not sure that Cheryl is.
Fascinating. Yeah. I mean, Gottheimer, I know he also, I don't believe, has an elected background in Trenton, but perhaps as a guy with finance and other things, maybe that was part of their thinking from sort of the deal making perspective. But I guess another thing with Cheryl that I do think is interesting is that there has even been a little bit of an effort by the Chitterelli campaign to sort of cast her Jerseyness in doubt, which I thought was fascinating because Chitterelli, I'm like a lifelong New Jersey resident, whereas Cheryl has lived there. I forget what it is. Oh, a long time, to be clear. It's like 15 or 20 years or something. So she's been, lived in New Jersey a long time. But I guess coming off of Phil Murphy having been governor, and similarly was not originally from New Jersey. I was curious how much this might matter. I mean, look, New Jersey has a lot of people in New Jersey who are not from New Jersey. I mean, obviously it's a highly populated state, and that may not be a thing that a lot of people get hung up on, but nonetheless, it's interesting to me that that's even an angle that the Chitterelli campaign has tried to embrace. And I don't know if that has something to do with the fact that Chitterelli is, got a kind of classic Italian name, even pronounces it as someone who is Italian would pronounce it with the ch instead of a Ciadarelli, anglicized. And whereas Cheryl is from sort of the very well-heeled suburbs of New York City. So I was curious what your thoughts were about that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think broadly what they're trying to tap into, obviously, is just to make the idea that she's inauthentic, that it's sort of this manufactured candidacy, that it's, and again, I think what that appeals to potentially is an area where Republicans have been showing more and more strength, and that is with blue collar voters, blue collar, middle class, working class voters, and they do I think folks who in many cases do have maybe some deeper roots in New Jersey. So we talk about the gains that Trump made in non-white areas in North Jersey. I think another area of a sort of rich pocket for Republicans, and an increasingly fertile one for them just in general, are a lot of these blue collar, sort of big blue collar towns. A Clifton, New Jersey, a place like that, for instance, just in Passaic County. Trump actually won Passaic County, which is, in all the time I've been covering New Jersey, the idea of a Republican carrying Passaic County is kind of shocking. Trump did it. He did it with non-white gains, and he did it in Wayne, New Jersey, Clifton, New Jersey, places like this. So
Yeah,
again,
Passaic's interesting. Not to interrupt, sorry, but
Yeah,
Passaic's
go.
interesting also because the the 9th congressional district, Nellie Poe, who succeeded Bill Pascrell, who was an institution, in that district. A lot of it is in Passaic, and it's a Democratic leaning seat, and Trump actually carried it remarkably. And so now it's like a swing seat, or at least potentially a swing seat, which is kind of wild. But yeah, the just looking at, that's sort of this neck of the woods on the map that I have right here with Patterson and Passaic and Clifton, as you noted, right there. Just these really big swings to the right, and even to the point where in some of those cases, like Clifton, Trump actually carried Clifton. It didn't stay on the Democratic side of the ledger. And so I guess thinking about Cheryl and her candidacy, it's sort of, to me, and maybe this is a good place to close out. It's sort of like Democrats are just desperate to hold serve in a way, to use a sporting analogy. Just they know that this is a Democratic leaning state still, even after the big shift to the right in 2024. So if they can just harness enough anti-Trump energy, and I think it's worth noting that I saw the New York Times report recently that the most expensive ad buy in this campaign, in terms of an attack ad, was one from the group associated with the Democratic Governors Association, essentially calling Chitterelli Trump in Trenton, or wanting to be like the Trenton's Trump kind of person, and that clear tie and that clear effort to make Chitterelli and Trump synonymous, really. And I guess looking, ahead, maybe that doesn't work, or maybe that works for Democrats this time around, but you do wonder about sort of the long, as you said, the great unknown is whether another Republican can do what Trump did.
Yeah, that's the thing for Chitterelli. I think whatever the outcome of the race is, I am curious, like, does he make any of these non-white gains that Trump made? Because in 2021, if you look at these places we were just showing you, you're kind of running your cursor near some of them now. Those Hudson County, places that are 70% plus Hispanic. Chitterelli wasn't making any of these gains. The only thing in these sort of urban, heavily non-white parts of New Jersey that Chitterelli had going for him in 21 was extremely low turnout. Like, kind of shockingly low turnout that even Democrats weren't ready for. That's one of the reasons it got close in 21. So, that could happen this time. But I'm just curious whether he wins or loses. Is he building meaningfully off how he did in 21 in these non-white areas? The place to really look for that, where Republicans think they've got some life here in terms of party registration, activation, actually, sort of thing, is Hudson County. You see Jersey City there, Jersey City, and those are geographically small but population dense. Union City, North Bergen, West New York, places like that. Those are places where Republicans think they have some life now, and I think as a longer term question for the future of Jersey politics, that's one thing I'm going to look at.
Very cool. Well, Steve, I think we'll leave it there. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about New Jersey with me. You've written a lot of great analyses over at NBCnews.com about this race, and I highly encourage people to go search them out. Obviously, this is Steve Kornacki, national political correspondent, chief data analyst for NBC News. A must-watch on election nights every year. And Steve, thank you again for taking the time to come on and talk about New Jersey with me.
No problem, Geoffrey. This was fun. Thanks.
Hey, thanks so much.